Good afternoon, everybody. Today is Tuesday, May the 19th, and we're going to begin our Budget and Finance Committee meeting. You've had a chance to review the agenda. The first thing we have is consideration of April 21st committee meeting minutes.
So moved.
We have a motion from Chair Swanson to approve the April 21 minutes.
Second.
We have a second from Ms. Edmonds. All in favor of approval of the April 21 minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you. All right, well, we welcome back our Team Supreme, Ms. Posey and Ms. Kinsey. I thought maybe you'd get a little time off between our last visit and now, but we're pleased to have you back. We're going to talk about the interim budget process now that the board has passed their budget. Everyone has our nice approved books. They're going over to the county. We'll see what the county does, and we're already watching what the state is doing. And we might have a little bit of intel about what some of those impacts could be. So I'm not sure who's leading off, Ms. Posey.
I'll just open us up. Good afternoon, Committee Chair Haggerty and members of the board. As you mentioned, Ms. Kinsey will share the interim budget process and next steps as we continue to follow state and local budget actions, including the interim operating framework and what that will look like for the district and the board until final appropriations are confirmed. And this is for information purposes, and I will turn it over to Ms. Kinsey.
Okay, so as Trish mentioned, we'll discuss the interim budget process, review the state budget information that we know of so far, review the process that we go through to get toward a resolution. Okay, and share our budget issues. So budget timeline, as you know, you approved your budget request on May 5th. On May 11th, the commissioners had a budget work session. On May 12th, the legislative leaders for the General Assembly announced a budget framework agreement to start with. May 13th, the Board of Education's budget was delivered to the county commissioners. The commissioners will have a public hearing on May 18th, another work session on May 21st, and they should adopt their budget resolution on June 1st. They typically do that at their first June meeting. We will bring to you an interim budget resolution on June 16th that we'll use to start next fiscal year. The slides aren't working right now, but the next slide is just the page in your budget that shows the county appropriation request, just showing that we've requested an increase of $25.3 million from the county, and that is the same figure that's reflected in the county manager's budget proposal.
That's page 4 if you're following along online.
Trish is trying to get it up and going. Wait a second. Do we continue on while she's or waiting for her?
Kind of peeking ahead, yeah, I think the next is sort of setting up the interim budget and explaining the process, so we don't necessarily need the slides for that.
Okay, so we shared the general statute 159.16 that describes an interim budget, which is basically what we do every year at the start of the year. So in the case that adoption of the budget ordinance is delayed until after July 1, the governing board shall make interim appropriations for the purpose of paying salaries, debt service payments, and the usual ordinary expenses of the local government or public authority for the interval between the beginning of the year and the adoption of an ordinance. And any appropriations shall be charged to the proper appropriations in the ordinance. So, what does that mean for us on July 1st? So it means that when we roll up our budget July 1, it will look just like the Board of Education's budget. Basically, in your proposed budget, the county appropriation is a pretty certain number, depending on if the commissioners were to make a change to the county manager's request. All of the other items in the budget are estimates. Estimates of what the state allotments may be, estimates of our federal grants. So we roll that up July 1. Salaries and benefits will continue at current levels. Resources in your budget have already been rolled out because the things in your budget were to support opening a new school, which will be opening, adding a 11th grade at Felton Grove, and a calendar change at Lake Myra. We also had resources in your budget to provide the schools based on their student membership for next year. And we've already begun the allotment process with our schools for next year. So those resources are already pushed out. And anything else in your budget was basically strategic budget realignment or reductions. So there were no new programs in your budget that we would need to hold back to see if we could still do those for a budget resolution. All the things I just described are pretty much have-tos with Idea School, and other things were reductions. I believe the only new-ish thing was the addition of, I think, $15,000 as a match for a grant for communities and schools. What do we know about the state budget? All we know right now, it is so very early, is that there is a state lawmakers agreement that we saw at a press conference. So that was a verbal information they provided at the press conference saying they had a starting point for both houses, for House and Senate to begin their budget work and their committees to try to come up with a budget for next year. The agreement has not been documented in legislation, so we're not even at that point yet. What they conveyed in the press conference is that teachers, the starting teacher annual salary would be $48,000. Currently, the base is $41,000. So that entry level into a salary schedule is about a $17,000 increase. And keep in mind that salary schedules are entry level only. That's how people come into the system. And then after that, whatever raises are applied to the schedule. The average raise they indicated would be 8% for teachers, but that could vary depending on the step and where that person falls on the salary schedule. They said there would be one-time bonus of $1,000 for teachers with more than 16 years of experience, $500 bonus with those of less than 16 years. They didn't exactly say what the person at 16 years would be, but that's just the language they used in the press conference, so we don't know the detail. Other state employees, they said, would get an average 3% increase and a one-time bonus of $1,750 for people making less than $65,000 a year and $1,000 for those making higher salaries. We don't know the language of that yet, so they did say an average. Sometimes when it gets in the details of legislation, they may convey that something will be in place for state employees. Sometimes they do something different for school system employees. So until we see the written word that's going to be looked at and possibly approved, we won't know that for sure. Listening to what they've said, and that this has not been given to us in writing yet either, my understanding is that if a budget becomes law before July 1, the bonuses would be effective in July. If the budget becomes law later, they intend for the bonuses to be effective when it passes. That's just my understanding. So that's basically all we know right now. Much more will come later. And just based on experience, I'd like to see the details before we would interpret for you what it means.
And I think that's the biggest thing that we want to share, that there's still a lot of unknown in this budget, particularly when it comes to the bonuses. Now, what the state has done in the past, they don't have to do this every time, is to say, we're going to give you the funding to pay for all bonuses. Right now, it would just be state employees or teachers that are on the state payroll. And so ultimately, anybody that's a federal employee or a local employee, they would be subject to those bonuses and those raises. So with the bonus piece, they can say, here's a pot of money, and we cover everyone, and you don't have to worry about it. So that conversation is still out there. There's a lot that hasn't been solidified. As part of the language that we're trying to press towards them as well, that this is what districts will need support from the General Assembly. Nearly every district in this state has put in numbers for a 3% raise. And so the average is 8%. If you look at those teachers that are higher down the salary scale, it's around 5%. But where do most of our teachers on the local salary come from? They're going to be the lower paid teachers that would probably come in higher than 8%. But staff are still working through making predictions of what that might look like. And so that's what we want to tell everybody in the public, that while we have a budget that we've set, everything is going to depend on what comes out of the General Assembly, the final decisions that they make. We characterize this as a good problem to have, meaning that teachers will see increases, state employees will see increases, but the downside is we've still got to figure out how we pay for it, and what we've done is about 3% like most districts have, but this could be different based on what the final numbers are.
And when the state is saying they're going to pay increases at these levels and also saying they're trying to decrease taxes, well, the implication of that is that they're going to be reducing something else. Because if your revenues are not going up and you're committing to this expense, and we don't know what those things might be or even what that will look like. We do know there'll be implications to the interim budget that we start the year with. Because if we have to pay these higher costs and they were not budgeted, as we talked about with other things, to get something, we have to give something. So we'll be having to figure that out.
So let's, before we go on, let's
Yes.
just get a few things firmly clarified here at this point. So we've never had to do this in a previous budget presentation, but I feel we need to clarify that we're talking about the 26-27 budget, state
That's
budget. Okay. And so then, continuing down that thread, it does not appear that the state is passing a 25-26 budget. And so we're currently operating under an interim budget for 25-26, coming into the final month of it, right? No.
We have a budget resolution for Wake County School System. The state operated this year under mini bills, so they did not approve a state budget. You all did approve a resolution for this year, because at mid-year, we made the call that likely nothing more was coming, and we adjusted to our allotments at that time.
And so all of the changes that we made in our board budget last year were incorporated when we adopted that budget resolution, even though the state did not adopt a budget. Had the state adopted a budget, or if they do in the next week to cover us for the next 4 or 5 weeks, then we would have to go back and look at any changes by like a resolution. But right now, we've moved on, and we're solely looking at 26-27.
Yeah, it's not likely, but if for some reason they were to do a budget change for 25-26, you already have a resolution. We would just reflect those changes in the materials you receive every month that shows our budget adjustments and how money comes in or goes away during the year. We would reflect that, but you wouldn't change your resolution that you've already approved for this year.
So for example, if we have salary changes, and in the interim budget, those don't become effective, but once we pass the final adjusted budget resolution, those would become effective?
I'm going to go through that in the slide or two.
Okay, sorry, jumping ahead.
Yeah, pause on that.
And then
I'll
just,
answer that.
then the last one on this one was, we talk about the potential impact of state salary increases beyond what we budgeted for. Can you give us any sense in terms of, I don't know if you know the number, or just even of the percentage of certified staff that is locally paid versus state paid?
I want to say it's 1794, somebody gave me the number.
So when we look, I'm just going to look in your board's budget, and I'll just tell you where we can look to see estimates of that. So the staff budget is on page 53 and 54. And if we look, after the administrative personnel, there's a category called instructional personnel certified, which is showing our teacher types.
Yeah.
So it's not a percentage, but it shows you that about 86,000 months, or about 8,000 teachers would be on state funding, and about 22,000 months, or about 2,000 teachers are on local.
Okay.
And then that next group right past that, instructional support certified, those are counselors, social workers, psychologists, coaches, coordinating teachers, who are also certified. So you see that about 13,000 months, or 1,300 staff are state, and about 5,000 months, or 500 people are local. So that shows you, and you know that changes all the time, but that's generally.
About a fifth of our certified staff, and then maybe about a third, roughly, of those instructional support personnel.
Yeah. And then beyond that would be all the non-certified, which is different places.
Yeah, at a much smaller percentage.
Yeah. So that's the place you can see that. Page 53 and 54 of the board's proposed budget. And it shows, so at the top, it's showing last year's number of months of employment,
Yeah.
and then state, local, federal, and total in your proposed budget.
Okay.
Those are months of employment, because we have positions that are 10, 11, and 12 months. So for administrative staff, you can kind of divide by 12 to get a full-time equivalent, and for instructional staff, you could divide by 10-ish to get about the number of people.
Ms. Evans?
I just want to make sure I understand. So when we talk about what we budgeted for versus what we didn't, we budgeted for 3%, not 8.
Right.
If the state comes in, if they finalize the 8%, we're talking about the local impact is what we would have to come up with, right?
The local
Because they'll
impact-
cover the state funded employees.
And I want to mention that in all of the grants, which a lot of our grants have certified staff on them, those grants would have to cover that. And remember that our federal funding is coming in flat-ish. I mean, we've gotten a few of our planning allotments and they're a little bit higher, but they're essentially working within flat funding and would need to cover the raises and any benefit changes for the staff on those grants. So it makes it tighter for the grants too.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Ms. Kendall.
Okay, so the next steps on the state budget is the legislature will work to complete a comprehensive budget bill. So, you know, one side will have a budget bill, the other side, they try to work together to get one budget bill they agree on, which includes funds for the items in the agreement and all the other things they may be putting into this budget. Could be increases, could be decreases. The House and the Senate would approve a budget bill at some point. Republicans control both chambers, so that may be a shorter process. I'm not certain. After the budget bill passes, it must go to the governor. So the Governor Stein, will have 10 days, and he can choose to approve and sign that budget. He can approve to veto the budget, where they could possibly override that, or he could let it become law without his signature. So the point there is, when the General Assembly approves their agreed budget bill, there's at least probably a 10-day time of where we're kind of in limbo, unless Governor Stein were to sign it. I mean, it's just letting you know the pacing, all this stuff takes time. Because I think sometimes people see the media, these raises, and they're like, oh, where do I get my money? And it's a process. So once, I'm on slide 9. Once the state budget is approved, then the Department of Public Instruction interprets those legislative changes. And I think they have like 10 days to 2 weeks to get information to us. And they interpret it, they send us the statutes, and then what that means and how we should roll it out. And then over time, and these don't happen all at once, they'll start providing our initial allotments to us, which is them officially saying your school district's getting this amount of resources based on the law. We will analyze the impact of the legislation, and we'll provide updates to the superintendent and the chief's and superintendent's team, saying, okay, this is what's happening, this is how it impacts the budget. Then the superintendent will bring recommended budget adjustments to the board for consideration and approval, because we'll likely have changes. Additional budget realignment may be necessary, since the local costs for salaries and matching benefits will likely be higher than were in your estimated budget. And no funds were in the proposed budget for bonus payments for locally funded employees. So if the state doesn't pay for state and local employees, we'll need to determine some one-time funding to cover that cost. And I don't know that this would be our recommendation. But if our recommendation were to be a fund balance appropriation, you'd have to approve that before it were to happen. And no matter the timing of this, you have one meeting in July. So there's, timing about how all this will roll out. So let's say all this gets approved, what would be the process for applying salary and benefit changes? Human Resources would update our salary schedules based on what the changes are in the state budget. Even before that, let's say that there are a lot of increased cost to local, and we've got to figure out how to pay for that. If you remember, our supplement for teachers is locally determined. You determine those dollar values each year. Your proposed budget includes a 1% increase to the local salary supplement for teachers, not to those dollar amounts. If, because these amounts are coming in much higher, one item you might consider, and you might not, would be, do we have to not do the supplement adjustment in order to pay these raises? It's just how all these pieces work together. So before HR could determine the salary schedules, they would need to know, does that 1% still apply or not? So just let you know how those pieces work, because the salary schedules show base and supplement. The employees, and the state tells us when to do this, we would move our employees ahead of step and apply the new salary schedules. Timing will depend on the legislature. If the state approved a budget in June, it is unlikely the salary roll would occur in July because it takes a time for the analysis and application of the legislative changes, all those things we just talked about. There are limited board meeting opportunities for the board to approve budget adjustments and salary schedules because of one meeting in July, and that meeting is after the July payroll is processed. Bonuses could be paid based on legislative requirements. If there are local costs, we have to identify funds for the one-time appropriation and then, or from budget realignment before those could be paid. Because your resolution indicates you can't pay for something if the budget's not in place. Okay, the next slide. So a budget resolution. Generally, what we've been doing the last several years is the resolution would come after you have committed to all these decisions. We would adjust the new budget based on the new salary schedules. And the best way to do that is once we have the new salary schedules, we've rolled our employees, we've paid them on the new salary schedule. The month that we pay them on the new salary schedule and pay a retro to July 1 to make it square to wherever we are at that point, our Oracle reports then project the cost accurately for every account code, and we can adjust the budget so that the budget is in the right codes based on purpose and function. The reason it's better to do your resolution after that is the county monitors our budget by purpose and function, and their resolution actually shows their resolution as broken down by purpose and function, and they allow us to give us a revision to those numbers based on the information when we roll the salaries. By doing that and having it accurately reflected, then we're not likely to hit, I think it's a 15% tolerance, that if we do hit that, we'd have to go to the county and explain it. So we would do the resolution after you've approved for people to be paid on the salary schedules. We would then pull all the information and bring you a resolution. So, for example, if we paid adjustments in August, we would pull the August 31 figures to use for the resolution and bring it to you at the second meeting in September. And if it happens later, it's just the month after we do the pay is likely when it will occur. So it is important for us to be accurate by the purpose code. To provide you some history, it might help to see this visually. This is the last 6 years. So for the last 6 years, there's been a budget from the General Assembly 3 of those years. The other 3, there was either a budget stalemate or no budget, and they passed numerous mini-budget bills for us to function. So I've shown the date, the 3 times there was a resolution, a budget, approved budget by the General Assembly. So for example, in 23-24, they approved a budget October 3rd, and we were able to do all the steps I just talked about and pay employees, and we were able to bring you a resolution in December. The year before that, they approved a budget in July 11th. It took time to give all the adjustments. We used September numbers and brought you a resolution in October. So there is always a delay, a month or a couple of months until you get the resolution. So that just lets you know why we're starting with an interim budget resolution and when we'll bring you the real budget resolution. I've mentioned that, keeping in mind, we have deferred budget items a year out. One more has been added since the last time we shared this with you. You're aware of the special education, $4 million with the grant next year. You're aware of the $1 million from community schools and the Medicaid issue. In addition, there are 2 magnet grants that end in the next 2 years, similar to the one that just is ending now, and you already have in your budget this year an increase to local because teachers in some magnet programs that were started moved to the local budget when that magnet grant ends. The coordinators, the central office staff, instructional coaches, they do not, but the teachers do. So in the MSAP Synergy Magnet Grant, it ends September of 27. And just the teachers in that grant, if they were to move to local, would be about $800,000. And in 2028-29, the MSAP Elevate Magnet Grant ends. Those teacher positions are about $800,000 too. So we know that in those 2 years, we'll have another transition off of a magnet grant. So I've just added that to the list for awareness, knowing all these numbers may change, but it just keeps it on the radar. And do you have any questions for me?
Any questions about the presentation so far? Again, go ahead, Mr. Hardy.
At some point in the future, can we get kind of a presentation or conversation for our public to know why and how we ended up with so many staff on local budget? And the importance and relevance to our schools and how they impact our schools, and why then we have to adjust the budget to cover all of these. To pick up the salaries, to pick up the bonuses, because we have a lot on there and people may not understand as we're faced with difficult budget decisions why we have to do some of these things, and how it would be great if the state would cover more positions in our schools.
I think that is great information for the public to know, because every district is not in a position where they can have a large number of teachers on the local budget. Many are just very small. I think this is a perfect example of where we talk about how the Wake County government is providing resources so we can do this kind of thing, but that work needs to be put on someone else so we can free these local dollars up to do other things. But I think it'd be good for them to see the number we have, how that number may have increased or decreased over time, and what that's costing us, and certainly knowing that when something changes at the state in terms of a raise or anything of that nature, that effort is also put on the local side as well, and most people don't understand that. So we'll certainly make sure that we've got those talking points and information that we can share.
Yeah, and there's some districts that have very little on local because they're receiving more money from the state because they're either a small or a low-wealth county, or it's one of the districts that the state provides supplements, and we're not one of those districts. So, yeah, we'll be glad to.
I mean, that's a great example. With all the concerns about student mental health, the legislature said, well, we're going to fund additional mental health support, and we'll give you one more school psychologist per district. If you've got a district that only has one high school,
That's right.
that's a great deal. But if you want to have an impact here, we have to pay for that out of our local county funds. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Well, Ms. Kinsey and Ms. Posey, we have a lot of work ahead, but I hope this was a good roadmap for everybody, kind of charting out what we'll need to look at. Again, I don't just delete these slides. I do want to point you back to the items that they identified, the deferred budget items, because those are items that we will have to address in next year's budget. So if we have a plan for that we work on between now and then, we'll be better prepared for how to handle that in the future. Okay? All right, thank you. And unless there is any other business before the committee, we have our financial forecast update.
Well, good afternoon. So this is probably, I think, the first time we've really done kind of just a deep dive into our local operating. So these are the funds that really the board has the most control over when it comes to our local operations, what we request from the county, other revenues that we receive. So in today's presentation, we'll focus on three key areas: an update on how revenues are performing compared to our projections, how our expenditure controls are helping manage ongoing cost pressures, and what is the continued impact of inflation and fuel market volatility on our financial plan. So here on this slide, you'll see the various local revenues that go into balancing the board's local operating funds. So we have local county appropriations, which make up the majority of the board's budget. And you'll see that about $61 million is left to collect, and we receive those in 12 equal installments. So we know that we will receive 100% of the county appropriation. You'll see interest earned. We are just slightly below, not below our target, but we're slightly below in the collections for the remainder of the year, but we're at 93%, and we do anticipate hitting 100% of that projection. Fines and forfeitures are slightly over, and we've done an entry to balance that where we record additional budget and place that budget in our, I believe we're going to put it in our net savings. And you'll see that on the monthly report that budget will provide to you at the end of the month. You'll see print shop, small internal revenue fund. And then our other revenues, these go into Fund 8. These are revenues that are not eligible for the charter schools, so they do not receive a portion of this because they are exempt from the legislation. So our tuition income, miscellaneous income, the miscellaneous income, I believe, comes from things like rebates, our purchasing card rebates, interest earned on the accounts, our indirect costs, and student parking fees. And you'll see that we're at 98% of those collections. Any questions on the revenue sources? And
Any questions about any of those? I know that we've seen, these things rise and fall as local governments moved away from the red light cams, for example. We had more funds that were coming into the system for that. That's dried up a little bit, but now that the Supreme Court has reversed that ruling, there's chances maybe some of those could go up again. But I thought staff explained them well. Any questions? All right, go ahead, Ms. Posey.
So Trish, the only thing I would want you to clarify is the indirect cost, and is that from all federal programs or just certain ones?
so indirect cost does go into Fund 8 for all federal programs. We do not, and enterprise funds, but we do not collect on child nutrition because of their months of operating fell below the 2 months required by the state.
Thank you.
All right, so overall revenues are tracking in line with expectations, with our major funding streams remaining stable and no significant shortfalls at this time. And we will continue to actively monitor the revenue performance, identify risk early, and make adjustments if needed. And as always, at year end, the activity remains important to us so that we make sure that we balance 100% receipt of projected revenues that balance the budget. So now we'll take a look at the expenditures. So these are local expenditures rolled up as of May 14th. You'll see on the current year budget, we've got expenditures year to date, encumbrances, payroll projections, and the remaining budget balance. So we have spent or obligated 93% of the local operating budget as of May 14th. What's not included in this projection are things that the system does not forecast, including our extra duty stipends. We'll have a large payout in May, our substitute cost for the remainder of the school year, and also our charter school payments, because those are based on revenues received. The per pupil adjustment is done, and then we do those payments. So those are not encumbered here. In the Fund 8 budget, you'll see that the majority of this budget has been spent. We put the majority of the funding towards our utility costs, and we pay that out first. So we like to get all of our Fund 8 utility charges expended there first. Any questions?
Any questions? All right.
So we do still have some spending restrictions in place. To maintain financial stability, we're still enforcing spending restrictions on vacant central service positions. They are to remain unfilled for at least 90 days. There are some waivers for priority positions that need to be filled. Spending is limited to essential educational and operational needs, with some exceptions for non-carry forward state funds, because the state dollars will revert if we do not utilize them for the purpose that they're allotted to the district. And additionally, we have out-of-state travel restrictions unless prior approval is granted, and that's happening at the chief level. All right. One hot topic that we are monitoring is our fuel. So we know that fuel costs are increasing. Information I've received related to our vehicles on the road, like our maintenance type of vehicles, they're projected to see a $100,000 increase in fuel prices. And we anticipate that that would continue on into the first quarter of our next fiscal year. We'll monitor that. We're absorbing that with some of the savings that we're trying to generate, because we're focused on essential mission critical spending. Any questions? As far as our diesel fuel is concerned, we're stable right now because we've done some strategic planning with pre-purchasing of diesel fuel. And so right now, we're covered through the end of this fiscal year with the pre-purchase we made last year, and then through the 26-27, at least first quarter, we know that we're stable because we did a pre-purchase with local funds, so that we, right before prices really escalated, we were able to purchase about 1.5 million in fuel gallons. Any questions for staff?
So with that one, I haven't heard anything from DPI in terms of what they may be looking to do if fuel prices spike. We know in the past that they've always been able to step in. It just may be too early for them to be having those decisions. I don't know if staff has heard anything.
We did receive a small amount, I think $60,000 in the current year. I do not know what they're planning for next year as far as funding is concerned, but for 25-26, it was a small increase of $60,000.
Yeah, I don't think they intend to give any more allotments this year.
Yeah.
But in our webinar, the state DPI staff did say they know this is something that needs to be considered as the budget's being developed for next year.
And when you say this year, you mean before the close of 26, or do you mean for 26, 27?
We shouldn't get any more allotments for 25, 26. I think we have everything we received this year, but they're aware that they're also waiting to see what the state budget looks like, but they know it's a concern for next year if things continue like they are now.
Ms. Caulfield?
I was just wondering the time frame on this, since we are kind of in this unstable space with the fuel prices. What does this hold us for? Just the remaining of the year? What is that pertaining to?
So we have enough in reserves right now with our recent bid to get us through July, August, kind of that time frame. We'll do another bid in the next couple, 3 weeks, or time after that, sometime probably in June, we'll do another bid.
So really just set through the summer, and then we'll see what happens.
But again, we were strategic in that, you know, we didn't want to buy when it was high, we did want to buy when it was low, but to dollar cost average some of that, we were taking small bites all along the way to try to mitigate any hits that we might have in cost increases. So again, we just had a bid real recently, and we'll do another one in June.
Okay.
So Margaret, if you know, if you have any indication of what that price might be at this point versus what it was the last time?
If I had that crystal ball, no, I don't.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
So what does our future look like? So we expect continued economic challenges. So the pre-purchase of fuel provides the short-term stability. It could be 60, 90 days, but prices are expected to remain elevated due to global market pressures. We're also facing uncertainty from higher than anticipated teacher salary increases and one-time bonuses. We will maintain our current spending restrictions, focused on fiscal responsibility and long-term stability, and maintaining a healthy unassigned fund balance in accordance with Board Policy 8101. And that's our update for today. Are there any questions from the board?
All right. Any questions regarding the fiscal projections, fiscal update? All right. Again, if you had a crystal ball, you'd know a lot more, but I appreciate it, putting everything together, you know, based on what you know and what we've seen in the state. So, all right.
So, Mr. Chair,
Yes, please.
One thing I'll add is we know that the conversations around this budget, a lot of that is still not being shared. Everything we hear is kind of through media, some other insights that we may get. We do understand that there's a $2 to $3 billion surplus, and so we hope that at some point they use that to help with some of the budget woes. I was talking with a senator yesterday, and I haven't seen or heard this, but that impression is that the increase that they're talking about is not something that's going to be immediate, but over a 2-year period. I haven't heard that. I asked Terry, had she heard anything about it? We haven't. So there's still a lot of unknown with it. So we're just going to continue to try to use our influence to where they can lessen the burden on the local budget. But until that budget passes, there's not much that we know other than what we read in the newspaper. But I just wanted to share that part.
All right. All right, then, Mr. Chair, if there's no final thoughts or business, we'll call the meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.